Cap Area User Group. My name is Lee Richardson, and I will be presenting on Blazor versus Angular, a client-side shootout. So just a quick intro about me. My name is Lee. I'm a MVP, writer, speaker, maker, and YouTuber on .NET and open source, or at least that's what it says on Twitter. I work at Inferno Red, great company. If you are in the market for a new job, they do 100% work from home, great company. And so, I don't know, this was when Blazor first got released, I got super excited about it because it just seemed like the idea of coding in C# and making web apps was really exciting. And at the same time, my daughter was learning to type, and I thought, well, maybe I could, I've never made a game before, maybe I can make something real simple. And so I made this game called typershark.io. Unfortunately, I stopped renewing the domain typershark.io because pretty much only like my daughter and one or two of her friends had ever visited it ever. Yeah, it's just like this real simple little game here. And oh man, I don't even have it running because I wasn't quite prepared for this. But what happens is these little sharks fly across the screen, and as you type the letters, then they do a little animation and they die. And so, in this case, you have to type W-E-E-K, and then the shark dies. And you keep typing them, and the sharks keep them, and they move a little bit faster, and they move a little bit faster. And it's a single-player game normally, but I thought what would be really cool is if we could take this and make it into a multiplayer game where, like, my whole family could have, like, competitions. And so, and I was like, well, do I make it collaborative or cooperative? And I thought, well, it just seems more fun to make it cooperative. So what you can do is there's, I wish I had it running. I don't, but you can start a game where you just imagine for a second. And it's normally a fun part of this presentation because I'll get some people in the audience to sign in, and we'll play a game simultaneously together. But you each get a lane, so there'll be like a top lane, middle lane, and bottom lane. If you got three players, and the sharks go across there, and if any one person loses, then everybody loses. And so you're kind of trying to help each other out. It's a real simple. Again, I'm not a game developer. But I thought it would be a really fun way to learn Blazor, and I learned a ton about Blazor. And I did a presentation about it. That would be a couple of years ago, Blazor WebAssembly versus Angular. I originally wrote it in Blazor Server, and then I rewrote it in Blazor WebAssembly because, as I'll show you in a bit, it brought up a whole bunch of exciting cool things that you could do. And so I wrote an article about it on a code project, if you're interested. So it's a quick little background about this. But we should talk first of all about what is Blazor. Or actually, as my daughter said, she walked into the room while I was preparing this slide, and she's like, Dada, what is Blazor? And I was like, oh, kiddo, that's the bad guy in the Hobbit movie, right? It's Blazor the Defiler. Because I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's I mean, he's definitely Blazor. So no, it is a client web. It's a way of building client-side web apps with C# in what you would typically only be able to do in JavaScript at a high level. So it was originally released in .NET Core 3 at the same time as .NET Core 3 in 2019. And the Blazor WebAssembly was then released about a year later. And then they updated, and they got a ton of really good enhancements in 2020 and 2021 with Blazor 5 and Blazor 6. And I cannot recall off the top of my head if there was any new updates for Blazor other than being able to run on the desktop with that the Blazor WebAssembly control that you can then run in .NET MAUI, which is super hot, and I would love to be able to talk about that, but it's not part of the presentation, and I don't have enough hands-on experience that I feel comfortable talking about it in great length. But there, it's cool, and it looks really powerful. But by comparison, Angular has been around a long time. When you go back to AngularJS, that was released in 2012. And then, Angular 2, 2016, and we're probably up to Angular like 23 by now, right? Anyway, Angular 12 was released in 2021. So it almost feels like it's not even fair to compare these two frameworks, one which has been around so long and one which has been around so short. But, just like in the Wild West, it doesn't matter, who's the new kid on the block. All that matters is who got the faster draw. So that is a brief history of the Blazor versus Angular. As far as the server side versus client side, those are two different ways that you can run Blazor. And it makes a big difference, but as you'll see, there are actually going to be a lot of similarities. So when you run Blazor in server side, this is roughly the way this works. There's C#, which runs on the server. It builds basically a DOM, which I guess is called a render tree. It sends that whole thing, after the initial processing, it sends the whole thing down via SignalR to a connection in the browser. And the UI thread handles that and then updates the DOM. And then as events occur, if someone clicks on a button, for instance, then the UI thread over here sends that event back over to the server in C#. It then does whatever it needs to do to figure out what diff should occur in the UI. Like maybe if you make a text box appear, then it just sends that DOM element change back down. And so it doesn't send a lot of data. It's not like the old update panels. You remember update panels in web forms, where it would be like a whole segment. It would just throw a whole bunch of HTML down. By comparison, this is much thinner and lighter. It's just sending very small diffs. And then when that responds back in the UI thread, then that goes back out to, just that one change goes back out to the DOM. By comparison, the client-side Blazor, you look at this and like, what are the differences here? It's pretty similar, right? The only difference is we took out SignalR. But in this world, it gets the C# runs. There's a render tree which gets sent to the UI thread. It updates the DOM. Diffs occur, but all of this happens in process. So architecturally, it's actually very similar. And what's super cool is that when you're running, I wonder if I actually did I get that? Oh, I did. I got that into Maui. Okay, so this is super cool. So in when you are doing desktop Blazor, which is where you take you can take a Blazor application that you've written, embed it inside of a special control inside of Maui, which is the new replacement for Xamarin Forms that was just released at build to general availability. At least the SDK was released, right? If you go right now today and you go and try and download Visual Studio and you're like, all right, I'm ready to do Maui, it's going to say this is in beta. And you're like, what? You lied to me. And the reason is because the Visual Studio itself, the tooling for Maui is still in beta. It's the SDK, like if you're to do it all in Visual Studio Code or do it all just through the command line, that's what's general availability. In any event, if you were to run, build an app, you can run it in the web, and then you can take that whole thing and run it inside, embed it inside of a Maui application. And then by virtue of including it that way, you can now have one application which can run in the web. It can also run in Android, in iOS, in Mac via Catalyst, which is a technology that the Mac made available, which is what they make their iOS apps come to life on the desktop. And then also on Windows via WinUI. Whew, I think I got all that. That's off the top of my head, not actually in the presentation. Feel free, anybody, chime in if I got any of this wrong. I definitely appreciate. Let me know if I'm steering you wrong. I think I got it though. So, but you'll take a look at this and you'll notice it's actually very similar again with the C# updating UI thread and a DOM, except that in this case, you have when you're running it on the desktop, you have a embedded browser. And now the user doesn't necessarily know this. It's just like Visual Studio Code uses Electron, and there's a embedded browser, embedded Chromium browser there. Same kind of thing. There'll be an embedded browser but the user doesn't necessarily know it. And what's super cool is you can take little segments. You could build your entire application in Blazor, or you could take a segment of it, just one page, for instance, and then you could start mixing and matching native controls in Maui. You could have a native tab control, and that's going to render natively in iOS, in Android, and Mac, and Windows, but then inside of the panel there, you can then include your Blazor app, which I think is just so cool. The fact that you can do this mixing and matching of native controls that get rendered natively on each device, and then mix in an app which can actually run in the web. It's like the dream come true, and I can't wait to actually try to really put it through its paces and tell you, yeah, this is a good demo, or no, this is the real thing. This is really good. I can't quite tell you that yet, but it sure feels good so far. Like what the little bit of fiddling around I've done looks good, and the demos look fantastic. We'll see. Okay. Okay, so we've got a small group here, so I'm just going to ask you some questions. We'll make this interactive. Feel free to come off mute if you're feeling brave. I won't give you a hard time if you don't. All right, so which one do you think is going to be better with a file? Which one's going to have a better file size? Like when you load up the app initially, is the server-side mode of Blazor or the client-side mode of Blazor going to be faster? Anyone? Maybe we don't have enough people for
server side is probably going to be more
actually server side.
Yeah, Peter. Yep. You both. Yep. Surkamp. Yep. You both got that right. The service. Sorry, say it one more time. Surkamp. Yeah. Yeah. You both got that right. The server side is definitely going to be faster, and the reason is when you have a client-side Blazor app, it's going to have to download the entire .NET framework. Like you're not just getting just the diffs, you're getting the .NET framework and any other DLLs that you might have included. All of that needs to come down and run an entire big chunk of code, which is running in the browser. So which one's going to give you offline support? Anyone?
client side, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. Going to give you offline support because yeah, you don't need to get those little diff grams or whatever. Similarly, scalability is going to be probably much better on the client side. Here's an interesting one. How about the API size? Like how much access are you going to have? Which one's going to give you more access to APIs that are in the .NET framework, the server side or the client side?
Server side probably, because server side will require more explicit public APIs as opposed to client side is probably be more integrated into DLL directly.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly right. And you know, if you're running in a browser, you're kind of in a sandbox. Like you can't just like go accessing random parts of the user's operating system. You can't just open up sockets and start connecting to things. So there's a lot of sandboxing that's involved in running in client-side mode. But you also, I mean, there's also like a lot of benefits to, so the server side is definitely going to give you a much larger API size. And one of the cool things that you can do when you run in server-side mode is you can connect to a database. You can't connect to a database client-side, but when it's running on the server, it gives you a lot more flexibility to be able to, you know, just write all your code on the server. Yeah, the debugging experience. Anyone want to guess where which one's got better debugging experience?
Client, I guess.
I would love it. I would love it if the client had a great debugging experience, but it's still just finicky. It's unfortunately the server side works really well, but when it has to compile all of your code down into WebAssembly / I'll get into the detail. I'm going to get into a lot of the technical details later, but the way it works, sadly, it just doesn't work as well on the client side as I would hope it would. How about browser support?
Server side.
Yeah, exactly. Server side's going to have it way better. Oh, The answer is actually server-side, and the reason is because you don't have to support WebAssembly. WebAssembly is a relatively new technology. I mean, you're not going to get Internet Explorer supporting it, for instance. So, I mean, hopefully you don't need to support Internet Explorer and really old browsers. But if you do, if you really need a lot of backwards compatibility, you're going to be better off with the server side. So just for fun, we could throw Angular in here because this isn't just a Blazor talk. We're trying to compare these frameworks. And I would love, I've gotten actually a lot of React experience recently, and so I would love to throw React up here, but fundamentally you're kind of comparing a traditional SPA to Blazor, so it doesn't matter that much. But I can chime in with if Angular and React would have differences in terms of the things we're going to talk about. But file size, let's see, which is going to be better, the file size for Angular or the server-side Blazor? Think about this. I think even the server-side Blazor, because you with Angular, you're going to have to download an entire framework, right? But at the very least, you don't have to download the entire .NET. You don't have to download like the .NET framework and any DLLs you reference. So I'd say it's going to probably be somewhere between the server side and the client side in terms of which one's going to have a better file size. Angular is going to have offline support. Obviously, it's going to have great scalability. The API size it's kind of weird to talk about, but I guess Angular would be closer to client side because you can't access databases and you can't open up random ports and you can't connect to, you know, the user's hard drive. But I don't know. There's that. The debugging experience. I don't know. Have you guys done a lot of Angular debugging? What do you think? Is it good? Is it bad?
No experience at all.
I find it's mediocre. I mean, one of the things I love about C# is it's just so easy normally to set a breakpoint, hit F12 and then drag up and then, you know, like, oh, I actually wanted my cursor to be over here and, you know, change. I don't know. Everything just seems beautiful and easy when you're doing C# and not quite so much when I've been doing Angular. You can make it okay, but. And as far as browser support, Angular's actually got great browser support. So I think it goes back to Internet Explorer, believe it or not. Oops. Okay, so that was client side versus server side. Let's get into some of the WebAssembly bits. So what is WebAssembly? Well, if you look it up, it is a binary instruction format for a stack-based virtual machine. Duh. But if you're wondering what that actually means, it looks a little bit like this. So if you have a traditional JavaScript file, this is our file.js, then when a browser goes and pulls down that JavaScript, it pulls it down, it parses it. Believe it or not, all the modern browsers then go through this process. It's a kind of a complicated process of compiling it, converting it to bytecode, and then on a bit-by-bit process as it's running, it does a JIT compilation, and then it gets turned into native code. So, you know, people think that JavaScript is interpreted, but it's actually compiled. It's just, there's a lot going on there. By comparison, if you have a WebAssembly file, this could be in a variety of different languages. It doesn't have to be in C#. There's a lot of compilers out there that will compile Java or, I don't know, who knows, probably Rust or it's probably like a Python compiler or something. I don't know, probably not. But there's a bunch of different compilers out there that compile various different things, different languages. So you run that compiler and then you end up with a .wasm file. And that .wasm file lives on the server, and it will then, when the browser wants it, it makes the request for the WASM file, and the compilation has already happened. And so you're bypassing the user's experience is they're bypassing the parsing, compiling, and bytecode steps up here and going directly to the JIT compiler. And that has some interesting consequences. And one of them, by the way, I read this book in preparing for this presentation, which is I was right at the bottom of my screen. Okay, if I just stop moving my mouse. Anyway, Peter Himshoot, Microsoft Blazor Building Web Applications.NET 2nd edition. It's a pretty good book. Probably a little dated now, but if there's an updated one, it might be worth checking out. Anyway, that's where I got this diagram from. And so, yeah, the biggest performance is you get to bypass all of this, which gives a big speed improvement in and of itself. But in addition to that, there's a whole bunch of additional instructions which are available when you bypass the parsing and compiling steps. So, so what does it look like? It looks a little bit like this. If you have a C file on the left, this is an article from Jeremy Likeness. I pulled this example together, and he wrote a little C application which would find a character in a string of characters. And he compiled that down to WebAssembly, and you can see what it looks like on the right-hand side. It looks a little bit like the intermediary language, like C#'s IL language, right? It's like kind of low level. It's saying move this instruction to this register and add this register to this other register and whatnot. It's very, very low level. So that's kind of what it looks like. And when people are using an application that's in WebAssembly, let's say I got a Fiddler session going on here with my little web app, and you can see the WASM file there got downloaded, and it's just blah, it's just a bunch of binary stuff. Look at this. This is an actual app that I wrote. This is my little game, and you might be wondering, well, what are all those DLLs doing there? Like, what the heck is going? Why would a DLL be in a browser? Like, why is that being pulled down? It doesn't make any sense. I thought this was WebAssembly. And the answer is that by default, it doesn't actually run in WebAssembly. There's just this one file, which is a bootstrapper, and that's the only thing that natively runs in WebAssembly. So if you have a bunch of loose C# files and Razor files, I'll get into those in a little bit, those get turned into your app.dll, which is what I just showed you earlier. And any other NuGet imports or whatever that you bring into, those all get downloaded, and then the browser itself uses what used to be called mono.wasm. I think it's now called .net.wasm. This is a little bit old. This was another article, Rick Strahl, great article. All these articles in the bottom, if you go back and follow them up. Actually, I got them all at the end. They're great posts if you're interested in really digging into the details about how WebAssembly works. And so that is like a bootstrapper, which then interprets all of the DLLs and the code in the DLLs. Then it becomes, WebAssembly becomes basically an interpreter. And that is why the performance of Blazor WebAssembly is good, but not nearly as good as you would expect it to be for it being WebAssembly, because it's not really WebAssembly by default. Now, there is a new feature which was just released in Blazor 6, which is Aot Compilation. And Aot Compilation is an extra switch that you can turn on, and it really slows down your compilation process. But it actually turns all of your .NET code into true WebAssembly. And you get much larger download files. And according to them, you get 5x improvements from the interpreter. But in my experience, I took my simple, silly little shark game, and I saw no performance improvements whatsoever. But I'm also not doing a bunch of CPU bound work. So it's worth keeping in mind that this Aot compilation is a cool option, but it's really only going to be beneficial for apps that are CPU bound. If you're doing a lot of CPU work, turn on that Aot compilation feature and you're going to be very happy, and it's probably going to be worth it. But just do it as part of your CI/CD process. Don't do it as part of your regular dev experience, because it's painfully slow. All right, so what are the benefits of WebAssembly? We talked about it. Should be, first, obviously, goodbye JavaScript. I don't know about you guys. I use JavaScript all the time. I use TypeScript all the time. I've learned to like it, but I'd be just as happy if I woke up tomorrow and there was no JavaScript anywhere in the universe and it all turned into C#. That would be just fine with me. Oh, and it's, once you get into the Aot bit and you're actually running in WebAssembly, you can get near native performance. And when I say native, I mean like running in C++ on, in native instructions. And it's orders of magnitude faster than asm.js. If you're familiar with that, that is a technology. That was the technology that they used to take Quake and run that in the browser the first time. They compiled all of the original C++ code, I think, into JavaScript, and they compiled it with asm.js and run Quake, and everyone was just blown away that you could run Quake in the browser. Now it's like, oh, Quake in the browser, no big deal. But anyway, faster than asm.js. And I think I mentioned this, but there's more instructions available to you than in the JavaScript language. So that also is cool. You wouldn't notice it as a regular developer, but it does provide performance improvements. All right, I probably dug way too deep on the details. If that was a little bit too much, I'll just get back to the features of Blazor, and so that we'll be able to be at a good grounding level to compare it to Angular. So first of all, what is it? It is the word itself is a combining of the word razor and I forget. It's well, anyway, it'll come back to me. But it has a whole bunch of features. It gives you this razor syntax and components, access to the .NET framework, layouts, data binding, interop, dependency injection, .NET standard. I'll get into that in just a second. So this is, oh, there it is, browser plus razor. So razor is the syntax that you get access to when you are using Blazor. You type razor syntax, which looks like this. It's this kind of a weird merging of HTML, and then you can do like @ and get into your C#, or then there's just like this whole @ code squiggle, and you can put in all this C# code, which I find deeply objectionable. And whenever I'm building a Blazor app, the first thing I do is convert this into a class, into a partial, and so you can keep these separate. The demos often show the C# and the Razor code commingled like this, because I think it's good for demos, but you don't need to do that. In any event, this is a simple app. Anyone care to guess what it does? Hopefully I kept it simple enough that it kind of makes sense. And
it just gives the page count.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, yep. It renders a little button here. When you click it, then it runs the increment count, goes down here, that increments the current count, that gets incremented, and then this immediately goes up when you click that button. It's current count 1, you click it again, 2, 3, 4, 5, it keeps going up. And what's kind of cool about that is you're getting data binding. So when you say @ current count and you change current count down here, it knows that this and this should get linked, and it automatically does that. One-way data binding, but you can do two-way data binding too. So yeah, there's the data binding feature. There is there has built-in, just like Angular, it has a built-in way of doing routing to individual pages and doing parameters to them. Obviously, you've got access to the .NET framework, which is super cool. So like down here, you're using the .NET framework's logger, and you could potentially intercept that and send it to different places, although by default, it'll go into the browser's console, it's got dependency injection built in as a first-class citizen. You can't even get away from it if you want to. So that's really nice. That's like, you go Microsoft, that is the right way to do that. Awesome. You also get components. So, I mean, that is the basis of a modern, any kind of SPA these days, whether you're doing React or Angular or Blazor, you need to be able to say, I want a player name component. What's a player name component? I don't know. I don't want to care about the details. I want my, I want to have little modules of functionality and be able to delegate the details to some other bit. And so that's components. It's awesome. You also get access to interrupt. So if you are in JavaScript and you need to call into C#, you can do that. If you're into C# and you need to call into JavaScript, you can also do that. And if you're interested, there is a really nice Pluralsight course by Thomas Claudius Huber, where he talks about how to do interrupt with Blazor app. But just real quick, it looks a little bit like this. So if you're in JavaScript, you could do something like a document on key press or whatever, and then you could, there's a on the global object, on the global scope, there's a .NET object, and on that there's an invoke method async. And the first parameter to here, it's a little weird, like what do you pass in there? That is actually the name of the DLL. And then this, the JS key press, is the name of a method. Let's see if I hit next. Oh, here we go. So this would be how to you use the attribute JS invocable and make static, and then that will give you access back into C# from JavaScript. And I had to write this code for my game because Blazor did not have a thorough enough API that it had access to the on key press. So I had to write this code for the TyperShark application. As everybody types buttons on the keyboard, that needs to get sent into JavaScript. Sorry, sent into C#. Similarly, from C# to JavaScript, you can, let's see, oh yeah, there's a JS runtime object. How do you get a JS runtime object? Dependency injection. Just annotate it with the inject attribute here, and then you get access to an JS runtime like that. Microsoft, once again, using the right patterns, using interfaces. Thank you. I'm a big fan. They've really, architecturally, it feels nice and clean and well done and unit testable. All right. So that's interrupt. And they also have layout and content pages. So this was Jill Clarine has a Pluralsight course, which he builds out this this like baking shop where you can order cookies and stuff. And you know, the important thing is just that you can click home, or you can click employees, you can click add employees, and the layout, the top and left sections stay the same, and the content area changes. One of the features of Blazor that is nice. Everything you would expect in a spa. And you get access to NuGet. You get access to all the NuGets. So whatever NuGet you, oh, there's people waiting in lobby. I'm so sorry. It's so hard to run and present at the same time. Chuba and Vismate, I'm sorry that I didn't join you into the chat sooner. I've been presenting. It's hard for me to focus on both presenting and being the MC at the same time. All right, well, yeah, you're hopefully he'll get something out of this. Anyway, in case you missed it, tonight's regular presentation is not happening. Labrina was unavailable. I will not be upset if you back out because you were looking forward to seeing her. Instead, I'm doing a presentation on Blazor WebAssembly versus Angular. That was the team voted. It was one of two presentations I had available I could do on short notice. So we was just talking about some of the things that you get with Blazor. The last thing here is that you get access to NuGet, so you can pull down anything that you have available in NuGet, which is obviously a lot of packages, a lot of different bits and pieces you can pull down. Anything which is compliant with .NET Standard 2, maybe. I'm not sure. You have to look that up, but okay. Okay. Normally I would do a demo, and I could still do a demo. It might be an absolutely epic fail because I didn't prepare to give this presentation tonight at all. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you want to risk it? Are you willing to see me flail a little bit, or do you want me to just move right along? You can vote with a thumbs up. If you want to see a demo, if you want to see me flail through a demo, give a thumbs up. No? All right. If you want me to just move right along and get to the content, give a thumbs up. Okay, that's a moving right along. If you're a human, give a thumbs up. Oh man. Oh man, no humans here tonight. Okay, we got one. Excellent. Awesome. All right, I will skip the demo. That is just fine. Yeah. So I compare Blazor and Angular across 10 different categories. These are just the categories that I cared about personally as I was writing this app. And I've been doing Angular since AngularJS. I've been doing it for a very, very long time. So I'm very familiar with it, and I have the ability to compare it against Blazor fairly thoroughly. So these are 10 of things that I cared about. First one is the view typing. And what I mean when I say this is a little page that I wrote for entering in. Oh, well, I don't know. You want to just glance at this code and take a guess what it is? And I guess the name of it kind of gives it away a little bit. It's going to show a text box. There's going to be a text box here, and this is oh, it renders here. It's going to say, yeah, it's going to say, what's your name? And then it's going to have a little button. Here's the button down here. And one of the things that I love about Razor is that in your view code, in the HTML or in the Razor syntax, if you mistype something, like if you type templayer.nam and you forgot the E, it gives you great tooling support. It immediately pops it up in red. It gives you the red squiggle under there, and it doesn't compile. So inside of your views, you get strong typing with the C#, and I love that. It makes for a great tooling experience. I love having good tooling experience. So by comparison, if you're in the Angular world, you got a component, your template, it's kind of all this, just a string. And you can, any Angular people here, they're going to say, well, you can put that on a different file, and you can, but you're still ultimately behind the scenes. This is really what it's doing, is it's just treating it as a string. And so you're never going to get particularly good tooling experience. And I've never seen particularly good validation of, when I have my ng model here, player NAM, if I did NAM, it wouldn't be able to give me much on that. And in fact, it doesn't even get a compiler error. This is what happens when you run that code with NAM, is you get in the console, you just get blah, and you have to kind of read all that and parse it. Not as good of experience as Blazor. So definitely, as far as view typing, if view typing is a thing, which is just a term that I made up, if that's a thing, then Blazor definitely gets the win for that. Component level CSS, I used to complain bitterly about Blazor not having this, but they added it in Blazor 6, which made me very happy. What this means is that you can specify. Well, in the Angular world, they have built-in support for every single component has its own styles. So I can say my style URLs are, and you can even have a list of them. I don't know why I'd ever have multiple, but here you have an add player.scss, which is Sass. It's a preprocessor. It's a CSS preprocessor, and if you do that syntax, it won't look up the stack. You don't use global styles, and it won't go into your components. It's just because I don't know, if you've done any applications of and you don't have nice components, you end up with this. I mean, raise your hand if you had just like massive CSS files that just make you want to cry. If you've ever worked on a project like that. Well, I would expect everyone to, I'm going to pretend that everybody raised their hand, because it's a thing. It's a thing that happened, but it doesn't need to happen. And when you have component level CSS, then you just have your CSS just targeted at the individual component that you're working at. And that is really nice. And so, yeah, V5, I guess they added, but they didn't do very good support. And in Blazor 6, they did add it, and it syncs instantly via hot reload. So hot reload was the new awesomeness they added in V6 of Blazor. So as you change your code, you can just see it get changed there in the browser. Theoretically, that's supposed to work with the CSS components, but it doesn't. You still have to recompile. That was my experience, especially with Sass or less. If you're doing any preprocessors, you want to do Sass or less, then you definitely have to recompile. And I complained to the team about that, and they acknowledged it and said they'll think about it, maybe, as if I have a lot of pull. But anyway, someone heard me. Maybe it'll get better. Anyway, I love using preprocessors for CSS, and so I would give Angular the win, even though Blazor does actually have component level CSS. As far as validation, this is the type of code that you would write for validation in Blazor. There's a validation summary and a data annotations validator attribute. You add those two things, and then you get, oh, there it is. Yeah, you get the name is required. And so maybe you're looking at it and thinking, well, where is the code that says the name field is required, or how did they even know to make this property here required? The answer is data annotations. It's right up there in the name. So you can put in a whole bunch of things. You can put in required, you can put in string length, you can put in display name, and you're able to put all of these things as your data annotation attributes on top of your models in C#, and it's just so clean. It's just such a lovely way of doing the base layer of validation that you need to do. I'm a huge fan of the way validation is done with Blazor. By comparison, when you need to start doing more complicated validation in Blazor, you can drop down to C# really easily. But when you do it in Angular, there's this reactive forms pattern. This was some code I needed to do to ensure that a password was valid and to ensure, of course, I got this off of Stack Overflow. You know, I didn't write that. but the code to do this, you have to create these two form groups because I don't know, and then you have to create a change password component and a new, I don't know, error state matcher. It's just complicated. It's really complicated to do validation in Angular. And I don't find React to be that much better, honestly. React and Angular, both the validation is fine. It's okay. But in Blazor, it's great. It's exactly the way validation should be. Huge fan. Blazor takes the win on validation. As far as tooling goes, this is kind of, when I think tooling, I just think anything which makes your life easier. So it's just that you're not in a, as compared to being in a notepad or whatever. So when you do ng generate component in Angular, there's a CLI tool which makes your life a little bit easier. It pops out your HTML file and your spec file and your TypeScript file and your CSS, or you can make that a Sass or less file or whatever. There's this command line that you can do to make everyday things that you need to do much easier, and that's a nice experience. That's pretty cool. You think, oh well, Visual Studio's got to be way better, right? By the way, I show everything in Visual Studio, but of course it's the new Microsoft, and you can do all of it on a Mac in Visual Studio Code if you want to. But I find the tooling just a little bit better in Visual Studio because I love Visual Studio. This, by comparison, sorry, I lost my place. Oh yeah, the tooling. So if you, I don't know what the screenshot is supposed to show. I've forgotten. But when you do file new Razor page, file new Razor page in Visual Studio, it does not give you a code behind by default. It gives you this syntax, which I kind of dislike, where it's got the embedded code in there, which I think is good for demos. But for a production app, I think it should have really created two separate files by default, so I can keep a much cleaner separation between my user interface and my logic. Personally, that's what would have been a nicer tooling experience for me. But it's okay. It's not terrible. And let's see. Sometimes the IntelliSense just kind of falls down for some reason. It still feels just a little bit buggy. It feels like a technology that's been around a couple of years, not that it's been around a couple of decades like Angular. But the tools, yeah, sometimes just no suggestions pop up. Let's see, this is, oh, the dev inner loop. It's kind of related to tooling, but when you're in Angular and you make changes and you go and, you know that thing where you're typing code, hit save, Alt Tab, and then hit F5 and like refresh, because you want to be able to get feedback as soon as you type, see feedback, like that. Having that fast loop between typing code and seeing results is really, really important. It's what makes a good experience, a good dev experience. And in Angular, it's great. It's super fast. I love that experience. And older versions of Blazor had a terrible experience. You had to recompile, and it wasn't very good until Blazor 6 Hot Reload came out. And now it works a lot of the time. And the Hot Reload is awesome. I had problems with it, but I think I got it when it was more beta-y, and I haven't retried it since it got to RTM. So don't take my word for it. It's probably awesome right now today. I had some problems with it, but it promises to be amazing. Like, you just make changes to it and you instantly see the changes in the browser. It should be even better than Angular. Should be. And yeah, the team, I've even talked to the team about it. They say it should be fixed. I just haven't gotten back to, if I had time to prepare for this presentation, I would have updated that slide. And then sometimes it just falls over. Sometimes Visual Studio just falls over and you have an error and you end up on this. If I'd done my demo, it would make a little bit more sense what this is. But there's times where you just end up on this screen and you're like, what the heck is going on? I didn't write this code. What is this code? And the answer is that when you have a Razor file, .razor over here, and you are making changes to it, in the background, every single bit of XML Razor that you're writing is getting converted into, is getting compiled. I guess it's getting compiled into this player name component .razor.g.cs, which lives inside of your obj directory. So if you go into your obj directory and you dig deep enough, you'll eventually find all of these partial files, and they are the reason why you can create a player name component.cs, and it will merge it with the Razor file, because the Razor file is actually a C# class that looks like this, that hopefully you never, Microsoft, I'm sure, was hoping that you would never know that this even existed, but it does occasionally just pop up, and it's kind of mildly annoying. It's just a little immature, but it's getting there. It's getting better. So anyway, they both have pros and cons. They're very different. Angular, Blazor, and React too is they're all just very different. And it's sort of hard to say one, that they all have strengths, they all have weaknesses. But that's a quick tooling overview anyway. As far as maturity, that's an easy one, right? Angular wins. It's been around for forever. It's going to win. There is one thing to keep in mind, and that is that it's also, compared to React and Angular, it's still just not that popular even in 2022. And it's probably not going to ever be as popular as React. It's probably not going to ever be as popular as Angular. So if you're expecting to be building a framework that, I mean, there's a passionate community around it, a really passionate. It's got to post a question on Stack Overflow, you're getting an answer, but you're just maybe not going to have access to as many components, as many support as you might expect if you were in a more popular framework. Anyway, obviously Angular gets the win on majority. It's an easy one. As far as language, I'm going to do a quick aside here, and that is, hey, I don't know if you've seen this XKCD. Hey, what are you doing? I just thought of a bad opinion someone could have, and now I'm searching to see if anyone does, so I can be mad at them. Sounds like you have a healthy relationship with the internet. Hey, at least I'm not this guy I just found. I am this guy. I'm going to have an opinion. I'm going to share my opinion, and that opinion is C# is awesome, right? I love C# and it makes Blazor so attractive to me. This is some code that I had to write for, I don't know, this is actually a production app that I wrote, modified anyway. This is the typical kind of code that you would write in Angular, it uses RX, the reactive extensions, and that was just kind of reactive extensions was built into the way that Angular is normally used. Now, someone always says they have async and await support, and they actually stole it from C#, and I would agree with you, but it's still not idiomatic. This is more idiomatic. You see this much more often in Angular. And so this is like user service dot find all. Okay, so I said what I did. Now I'm going to dot finally. It's like, shouldn't the finally be down at the bottom? And then there's a dot subscribe, which is, I guess, what happens when it succeeds. And then what happens if there's an error? Oh, well, that's this little lambda. I don't know. It's all out of order. It doesn't read sequentially. It is really objectionable to me to have to write and maintain and read that code. By comparison, the way it should have been done in C# is this. Like, it just makes sense. Like, I can just jump right to what I wanted to expected, the happy path. The normal case is here. That's all I care about 9 times out of 10. And if I need to care about what happens if there's an exception, I know to jump down to this section. And if I need to care about, how memory is getting cleaned up, I can jump down to the finally. It's so much cleaner. Await and async is absolutely wonderful. And it is the way everything is done by default in Blazor. Just one little example, but overall, C# is like the best language ever. And hopefully I'm preaching to the choir since this is a .NET user group. But Blazor definitely gets the win for me on the language of choice. Let's talk about debugging experience. I complained a little bit about this earlier. In fact, I showed a screenshot earlier, but yeah, this is what's going to happen. What's going to happen if I run this C# code right now? I'll give you a hint. Actually, there's going to be a divide by 0 error. That's what the set name is right down here. So you get a divide by 0 exception. So if you are debugging this in WebAssembly, wouldn't you expect, because I turned on exception settings and I said I would like to break on all CLR exceptions, wouldn't you expect that a breakpoint would pop up right where this error occurred? That's what I would expect, because that's one of the lovely things about .NET. It doesn't happen. It doesn't. Instead, what you get is a runtime error that pops up into the console like this, and an unhandled error has occurred. Would you like to reload? Not great. As a developer, I want to see where the error occurred and not have to read a stack trace. I don't know. It's a small thing, but it's these little things that kind of add up. It kind of paper cuts. By comparison, this actually does work when you're in Angular. If you turn on all exceptions, it'll pop up the exception right where the error is. I don't know. Overall, I don't like debugging experience in either one of them, but I'll tell you where the debugging experience is fabulous, and that's Blazor server. But this was supposed to be a Blazor WebAssembly talk. So that's debugging, testability. Testability is a first-class citizen all throughout Blazor. They've done a lovely job. The team has done just an incredible job, knocked that out of the park. I didn't write a lot of tests in my silly little game, but it's possible. And testability is absolutely first-class citizen in Angular, so that's a draw. As far as interop, so this is a slightly complicated story. So if you are in Blazor, you get your code from NuGet, right? If you're in Angular, you generally get your code from npm, right? So that's straightforward. But what happens if you are in Angular and you want NuGet code? Let me just tell you, no one's ever asked that question, because anyone who is ever in Angular doesn't need anything in NuGet. Generally, everything they want is available on npm because it's a very, very popular place to publish code. How about this? What if you're in Blazor and you want to get up npm code? Turns out that's a more common scenario. And so, yeah, so you might look at this. You might be tempted to look at this diagram and say, oh, well, if Blazor can get code from NuGet and npm, then Blazor should win this whole category because it has access to all the code everywhere. Like, that's so much more powerful. except for the fact that you have to do interop. So if you are in Blazor and you want to get NPM code, it's a bit of a pain. You have to write interop code to call into your C# and to call back out of your C# into the interop component. It's just not a great story. So this is actually, I think this is a more realistic diagram. If you're in Blazor and you're getting most of your code from NuGet, you're fine. But if you have a need for what you're doing to get code from NPM, you're not going to be in a great way. And so I would actually give Angular the win for interop, even though it doesn't have access to quite as much code theoretically. Depends on what you're doing. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. That's interop. As far as code sharing, this is a cool little segment, because this talks about sharing code between the server side and the client side. So in an Angular world, you're probably accessing back into, I don't know, a Java app or a C# app. You have no idea. You don't even know, but you don't have any ability to easily share. For instance, how about just your domain models? Wouldn't it be nice if you could, if you've got a product and you change the product name to a product name something, and you make that change in only one place and it propagates through both your server side and your client side code? That would be fantastic. And you get that with Blazor. That's what's amazing. But you can take it even a step further than that. You can share much more detailed code between your client side and your server side. And for my game, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could either play single mode, and you're playing single player mode, then now I wrote this game engine. I put it into a shared library. So there's in my code, there's 3 projects. There's a client project, a server project, and a shared project. And the shared project, when you're in single player mode, you get the single player game engine adapter. It pulls down the game engine, and then this code gets rendered in the browser as a DLL, but it gets rendered in the browser. And so this same code could also be run on the server. And in fact, it is when you are, because playing multiplayer is a lot more complicated, right? You need this game engine to live over here on the server in order to figure out what the score is and in order to communicate with the multiple different clients that might be connecting to it. And so this exact same code, depending on whether you click a single player button or the multiplayer button, will either be running client side or will be running server side in your ASP.NET server. And I just think that is so cool. Like, you have so many more options and so much more flexibility when the code that you write not only can be run in both server and client side with models, but when it could be run possibly client side or server side or both, depending on just like what you need. So that's just not something I mean, I guess you can get that with Angular if you've got a Node backend, but I've never worked on a project where anyone's ever pulled that off. I've never pulled it off. I've never known anyone to really pull it off cleanly, where you're sharing JavaScript code really cleanly between, even when you're in Node and Angular world. Just they end up being separate apps entirely. So, but it's really easy, brain dead easy to do that in the Blazor world. And so I just think that's so cool. And now with Maui, you're getting the option of additionally being able to run it on natively, getting that code to run natively in Android or iOS or Windows or Mac, and that just blows this whole category out of the park. So Blazor definitely gets the win on code sharing. If that's something you need to do, take the Blazor choice if you're trying to choose between the 2 frameworks. Ooh, all right. What is this? Aot compilation. Oh, perf. Oh, perf. Oh, I guess I had a number 11, perf. And let's see, what did I say? With that Aot compilation, theoretically, yeah, you can get your code to run insanely fast. And so Blazor could potentially get the win for .NET 6 for perf. So if you had a new project, and like, let's try to sum all this up, because I've given you a lot of different information, a lot of different categories, and maybe your head's spinning a little bit. Let me try to close this out for you. If you had a new project that just started up tomorrow and you had to choose, do I go Angular or do I go Blazor? Here is here's what I would recommend. Not this guy. He's not the winner. I think he's about to get thrown. Right. Okay. So as far as view typing, I gave Blazor the win. As far as component level CSS, I gave Angular the win, but it's not a strong win. But it still gets the win because of the preprocessor, the CSS preprocessing. In terms of validation, Blazor gets the win. In terms of tooling, now Blazor gets the win. Maturity, obviously, Angular gets the win. A strong win on that. As far as language, I gave 99 points to Blazor, so it just wins everything because it's C#. As far as the debugging experience, I think Angular is a better experience there. As far as the interop story, if you've got a lot of interop, Angular is going to be your best friend. And as far as code sharing, Blazor gets a strong win in that category. So I don't want to give an it depends kind of answer, but it definitely depends on what your project is. I used to give a hard pass to Blazor when it first came out. Once it got, in fact, I've got a video on my YouTube channel where I'm like, don't use Blazor unless it's just for a prototype. I have changed my tune, and I would now pick Blazor for a variety of apps. I might even say it be like my default choice, unless it doesn't hit specific things. Specifically, I would choose Angular or React or Vue if it's really mission critical and you need that maturity. If you've got a really tight deadline and you need to be able to, you don't want to be surprised by pulling down a third-party dependency only to find you've got a whole bunch of interop to write that you weren't expecting to write. If you use a bunch of JS libraries and you know ahead of time that you're using a whole bunch of JS libraries, use a traditional Angular type of thing. And if you want it to be really gorgeous, you've got so many more options available to you when you're doing Angular. That said, everything else, I would definitely pick Blazor. So most projects, I would probably choose Blazor if it has a NuGet dependency, or if your code is available there in NuGet. That's an easy one. If you want that option of server client code sharing, and you're doing a lot of that, oh, definitely go with that. And if it's good enough in terms of being attractive, but not like, maybe not having access to all of the beautiful controls that you're used to, then use Blazor. So that's kind of how I summarize the last, I don't know, minutes, something like that. Got a lot shorter without a demo in there. So that's it. That is my presentation. These slides are available at this link. The game itself used to be at typershark.io, and it's not running right now, so you just ignore that. I've got this video, which is just a little bit older, on there on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. If you are interested in that, Blazor. Oh yeah, getting started with Blazor versus YouTube. It's a blog post. The code for all this, for the TyperShark thing, is all open source, and then all of the references that I have, the Jeremy Likeness article and the Pluralsight courses and stuff like that, are all over there. So yeah, my name's Lee, and yeah, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation, and then I'll see if anybody has any questions.